was studying again mammals and went back to Kenya on an internship, mistranslated something in Ma and ate really the parts of goats you don't want to eat, got horrendously sick, and then while sitting there in a hammock thinking I was maybe going to die, decided I'm going to appreciate whatever comes by this hammock. I think at this point 10 pelagics on the west coast, and every single one canceled due to weather, canceled because they made the wrong booking, canceled because this happened. I got sick, and it just felt like I was cursed. If something is just unfeasible, if it's too much, if going there is going to risk my health seriously, there was canceled a survey, said no to a community who I was supposed to be working with, and driven immediately to Victoria, and then driven back over Sutton Pass at night. I was already sick, and I'm like, I don't know if I could safely do that 9-hour drive and then start a seabird survey crack of dawn. Scary or exciting? There's a certain amount of rain you can bird through, and there's a certain amount of rain where there's nothing. The storms coming off the Pacific this year have been unbelievable. We had a bomb cyclone. I was living in Victoria. It means a shitload of rain and winds like you would not believe. Is it safe? Like, where can I sea watch from? And they were telling me, look, we're going to be expecting upwards of 2 to 3 meter swell. Our sea watch spots are going to get washed over, and they're going to be throwing logs. The ocean is ferocious. I genuinely think if I'd gone out to Otter Point, which is a sea watching spot in Greater Victoria, there's a good chance I wouldn't have come back.
It was a rainy day in Birderland. It is October 30th, 2025, the night before Halloween, and it is raining, and I am stuck inside watching the rain come down. It is spooky outside. There are no birds. It feels lonely. Sorry. I won't claim that this is going to be a spooky episode, but there are 1 or 2 scary birding stories from our guest Liam Ragan. Liam broke the record for a Vancouver Island Big Year, but beyond that, there's a lot of fine conservation work out west for the Rocky Point Bird Observatory. His job gave him the freedom to travel around the island while allowing him to do his Vancouver Island Big Year and set the record. I'm going to set the record straight, actually. Because enough about Liam. It's time to get back to me. As you may have ascertained, I love talking about birds and myself, not necessarily in that order. If I didn't cut out all my personal stories, these podcasts would be twice as long. That being said, and the reason for a 2-month gap between episodes is that I have been on the road birding nearly every day. On August 29, I finally got my first Wilson's Warbler of the year at Long Point, and later in the afternoon, a Buff-breasted Sandpiper at the Sod Farms in Brant County. A week later, I was back at Long Point Field Staton for a very rare Townsend's Warbler. That same afternoon, I rushed to the Staynor sewage lagoons here in Ontario for a Ruff. It's not a very explanatory name for a bird, Ruff. R-U-F-F, but it's because it has a ruff when it's in breeding plumage. It's quite spectacular. Look it up. All the while, I was planning my trip out west to see the whooping crane migration for the first time in Saskatchewan. That had been a dream trip of mine since beginning birding in 2012. I had seen the whooping cranes where they winter in Texas, in Wood Buffalo National Park, where they breed in northern Alberta, and in between, a couple of others, one in Florida and one in Michigan. Finally, on September 30th, 2025, I saw my first flock of migrating whooping cranes in North Battleford, Saskatchewan, just north of Saskatoon, where my mother was born and where I visited on road trips a couple of summers when I was very, very young. I met up with my friend Gavin McKinnon and his birding group, and we all got to enjoy these marvelous but endangered birds. I then headed down to Grasslands National Park, but made a stop in Swift Current for a broad-billed hummingbird that had been visiting feeders at Josie's backyard. This bird went north instead of south and was enjoying the cool autumn weather of southern Saskatchewan. Alas, its fate is unknown, as it will never make its way back to the southern United States. The next morning, I got to Grasslands National Park as the sun was coming up, and after an hour found what might have been the last remaining burrowing owl in the park. The rest had headed south for the winter. After a long drive, I was back in Ontario. I've been seeing fall species like red phalarope and Nelson sparrow, and chasing rarities like purple gallinule, western cattle egret, and little blue heron. We also had 2 super rare birds, a Grace's Warbler, which I was a day late and $1 short for in Algonquin Park, and a gray kingbird in Chatham, Kent, which I raced down the highway to see, a new lifer for both my Ontario and my Canada lists. And frankly, I am exhausted from all the driving, chasing, and even recounting these stories. So it's time to relax, clear your mind of birds and chases and lists and such, and listen to Liam Ragan's story of his Vancouver Island Big Year, where he will recount stories of birds and chases and lists and such, and even a few scary stories from on the West Coast. Welcome. Glad to have you here. You're the third person that I've had on the show from British Columbia, and my favorite spot is Victoria. That wasn't even something I thought someone could do a big year. It's pretty big, and you can go out on amazing pelagics. But before we get to that, give me a little biography of yourself and how you got into birding and 2024.
For sure. So my name is Liam Ragan. I live here in Victoria, BC on the territories of the Wasanik and Lekwungen First Nations, and I sit on the board of Long Point Field Observatory. I've been a birder since 2017, and this last year, 2024, I set out with the goal of breaking the Vancouver Island Big Year record that was set by Anne Nightingale in 2015. A bit about myself. I'm originally from Vancouver, so just across the Georgia, and grew up actually in Kenya with my parents. They worked there for the UN, was surrounded by amazing birds, didn't pay attention to them, really was interested in mammals. And then it wasn't until I moved to cold, gray Montreal in winter that I was like, wait a minute, I should have paid more attention. I was studying again mammals and went back to Kenya on an internship, mistranslated something in Ma and ate really the parts of goats you don't want to eat, got horrendously sick. And then while sitting there in a hammock, thinking I was maybe going to die, decided I'm going to appreciate whatever comes by this hammock. And it was some sparrows. And I was like, wow, those are really cool. I should really be paying more attention to these. And then all downhill from there.
As I'm sitting here editing in Dunnville, Ontario, on a beautiful, sunny, cloudless day, hoping some birds fly over, I'm just sitting at a picnic table editing this podcast right here. I enjoy when people say it's all downhill from there, or it was all down the rabbit hole. That is a common expression, and I just love it. If you have more expressions, more idioms about what happens when you become a birder, I'd love you to share them with me. See ya. Once you got back from your second trip to Kenya, what was your next goal?
Yeah, so got back to Montreal from there after doing that internship. Had my eyes open to the fact that there were really interesting birds out there. There were more birds than I understood. They were doing more interesting things.
There wasn't just regular sparrows.
Funny you say that. The first time I came back, plugged into the McGill Student Birding Club, and just some of the most welcoming people in the world, right? So the first walk I went out with one of the leaders, Anthony Raffa. I remember I was meeting him up on the mountain, and they had all these feeders set up, and I saw this red bird, and I ran to the meeting point. Anthony, there's this incredible red bird. So he runs back with me and he goes, oh yeah, those are house finches. They are all over this place. And very kindly, not to make me feel embarrassed. And yeah, from there, the first birding trip we did, we went out to one of the forests north of Quebec City. And on those first two trips, we had almost every species of owl in Canada, like boreal owl. We had 7 snowy owls, handful of short ears, long-eared barred, great horned, a couple saw-whets. And I remember just thinking, oh, birding is easy. What's everyone talking about? I'm just going to go keep doing this. Have not seen a boreal owl since.
So what do you do as a career? Is it connected to birding, or is it something you have to get away from to go birding?
Yeah, so very fortuitously, my career is basically birding. I coordinate the Important Bird Areas program for BC Nature, which is a not-for-profit here in BC. Important Bird Areas is this global program that basically takes a globally agreed-upon standard of what makes a site important to bird populations, and then applies it across the globe. There's over 10,000 sites. We have 83 in British Columbia, and it essentially boils down to anywhere you can find at least 1% of the species population at some point in the year. So in BC, with the Pacific Flyway, we're really lucky to have a huge number of these sites we steward that's incredibly significant for migratory bird populations. 2024 alone.
And I guess Rifle is one of those?
Rifle is part of the Fraser River Estuary IBA. Pull up the numbers here if you want.
Sure. I like numbers and statistics.
Let me grab it for the Fraser River Estuary more specifically. They steward, I think, something like 13 species, at least 1% of their global populations and national populations. So they have about 2% of the world's American widgeon. They've had counts of up to 4,200 black oyster catcher, which makes up about 42% of every black oyster catcher on Earth.
Wow.
There's only thought to be about 10,000. They've had counts of 6,000 to 8,000 black-throated, not since 2005. Brant's cormorant counts of up to 2,700, so over 1% of Brant's cormorant numbers. Brant, California gull, Dunlins are really one of the highlights. You get those clouds flying over Vancouver, almost dark in the sky.
Wow.
Glockling gull, great blue heron, greater Iceland gull, long-billed bowcher, short-billed gull, northern pintail. The list keeps going on and on here. But yeah, the point is, my job is working with communities, both naturalist clubs, part of the BC Nature Network, and Indigenous communities to get recognition for those sites, because in and of themselves, they're not a regulatory device. You say, okay, I found 10% of the world's Iceland gulls are coming to the Heskett Harbor, or let's give a real example. Let's say 2% of the world's Brant's cormorant are hanging out in Heskett. But that doesn't inherently do anything. It gets globally recognized, but it's up to the government, really local communities, to make sure that site continues to be stewarded with that. So we do surveys with local First Nations, with with community clubs to see whether birds are still using them to get the sites identified in the first place. We'll do signage projects. We'll go and talk to schools to make sure people know, hey, did you know you live in a site that hosts 3% of the world's sandhill crane right here in and around Kamloops, BC? And then from that, work on action to make sure the sites continue to be able to support those populations. And so with this big year, it was, I think a huge part of it for me was about communicating with people just how special of a place they live. And I think that's a message that rings true for really anyone. Like you're hard pressed in birding to go too far without running into somewhere that's significant to some bird population. And more than that, being a young professional, I'm 27, the idea of not having work tie-in to the big year wasn't really financially feasible. I was amazingly lucky that some of the hardest birds that I was able to see over the year were ones that I was doing as part of work. If you want to see horned puffin on Vancouver Island, for example, you can charter a boat out to Triangle Island and it'll cost you a couple $1,000s. And you can spend a couple hours there and wait till one flies by and the flocks of tens of thousands of tufted. Or we built a community partnership with the only operator who regularly goes out there, and we're training up their staff on how to be collecting data while they're doing their tours. We're working with the First Nation on getting their youth back out to the islands for the first time in decades. And so being one of the people who was helping to get that project off the ground, I just, as part of work, I'm like, there's the horned puffin.
I missed that during my Canada Big Year.
It's a brutal one. Yeah. That same outfitter, they're doing 4 tours in 2025, Coastal Rainforest Safari. And we seem to have narrowed down, we get somewhere in the range of 5 to 10 horned a trip. And there's this one incredibly reliable one for 2 years now that every time we've gone to Sartine Island, the little ecological reserve before Triangle, I swear to God, I could hold a hula hoop up in front of the boat and say, okay, everyone count down from 10. It's going to fly through this, drops down off the same section of the island, goes through the same right off the bow. Like you could catch it with a net.
Very convenient. So you live on the island?
Yeah, I live in Victoria, which is right on the southern tip of the island. I did some fun math with a couple friends trying to figure out, okay, hypothetically, if we're mapping out a big year for the island, could you live anywhere but Victoria? And we really decided, no, this needs to be your home base. Nanaimo's great for birding. Comox is amazing for birding. You need to go to those sites. But there's so many birders packed into Victoria, and being that southern tip of an island, so many migrants get funneled through there, oftentimes for such a short amount of time. Like we had, unfortunately missed it by about 15 seconds. We had the only calliope hummingbird for the year on the island showed up on one of the mountains nearby for all of 5 minutes, hopped in my car, tore down, and it was gone. And there were many birds like that I got, many birds like that I missed, but just being that southern tip of the island, so much that's coming down the west coast. We have our great migrant traps where we know, okay, if you're a dusky flycatcher and you took a wrong turn and you need to cross the Salish Sea, this is probably where you're going to stop and grab a bite to do it.
Are there parts of the island that you had never seen before?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting part of it. Like I said, with work, for 5 years now, I've had this absolute huge privilege to get to explore this island, this province, to literally go where there's the most birds. And so it was interesting talking to the woman who held the record from 2015. She said one of her big goals was she wanted to spend more time on the North Island, more time in some of the more remote corners of the island. And I was saying, like, this isn't to be like, oh, I've already done this. It was to say, I'm so lucky that I feel familiar with Port Hardy, Cape Scott, the more remote stretches. We have a field site out on the Heshka Peninsula, which is about a 2-hour boat in. The only way to get there is if you charter a private boat. There's one family that lives in the entire harbor, and it's just incredible. The place that was new for me this year was until 2024, I had actually never been out in a proper pelagic, which is funny to say because for work, I literally run probably at this point low hundreds number inshore boats, are never going more than 4 or 5 kilometers at most offshore. And every year I've booked, I think at this point, 10 pelagics on the West Coast, and every single one canceled due to weather, canceled because they made the wrong booking, canceled because this happened. I got sick. And it just felt like I was cursed. And so going into this big year, I was really thinking, oh my God, if this happens again, if I don't finally get an albatross, like that's not a big year. You got to get out to the shelf. But I had really good luck.
That's probably the only way to break the record is to get those pelagic birds.
Yeah, we had some really unprecedented sea watching opportunities, as we had actually meant to talk earlier in 2024 in the fall. And then the day before, all of a sudden, the oceans opened up and all of these seabirds that typically you need to go 20 kilometers offshore to see just started pummeling down the Salish Sea. I think we saw the second or third ever bullish shearwater from shore in Victoria, alongside thousands of short-tailed shearwaters, pink-footed shearwaters. Like, it was just unbelievable. So there were birds that I only had offshore, red phalarope, black-footed albatross, the like. But really, this is a trend we've seen around a lot of seabirds. It seems like something is happening in open water that is pushing birds typically not found in the Salish Sea and water surrounding Vancouver Island into deeper and deeper inshore waters. Perfect example example, not yesterday, but the day before, one of my colleagues from Rocky Point, we have a standardized sea watch program where once a week volunteers go out and they record every bird flying past the island so we can understand what's coming into and out of the Salish Sea. He broke what I believe is the world record for the most ancient murrelets ever seen at one time with 17,260. I might be off by one or two there.
The flock that I saw from Nanaimo, probably like 200. And I thought that was a lot.
And that's the thing. 10 years ago, if you said you saw 200 in Nanaimo, people would say there's no way. That's not possible. You can't have seen that. And it's really only been in the last couple of years that all of a sudden we're like, what is happening? They're not going to their normal feeding grounds. We don't think they're showing up in places we don't expect. I think it was 2 years ago, they had an ancient murrelet on every single one of the Great Lakes, which again, if you'd said that 10 years ago, people would tell you you're losing it. There's no way. Same thing this year. We maybe get 2 Sabine Skull a year on inshore waters. Like I was really thinking Sabine Skull is going to be something I have to get offshore. We had thousands pour into you could see them from shore. I was out in boats where it felt like you were in a snow globe of Sabine Skull. Speaking of world records, a guy I birded a lot this year, Liam Singh, he set the world record for most Sabine Skulls seen at one point. From that same point as the ancient murrelets at about, and this is a bit longer ago, so I think it was about 7,000, give or take, just flying, ripping past the island. There was like 10 days in a row where they broke the high count for Victoria and the whole island with just wave after wave after wave of Sabine Skull. And they stuck around for a month. To go back to your original question, yes, you got to get offshore. When someone goes for my record, I'm going to say really focus on getting offshore because there's stuff I could have got that I missed.
What was the record you were chasing?
269 set by Anne Nightingale in 2015.
Prior to the big year, did you have a specific plan because you had to be in certain places at certain times for work? Did you map out a plan around your work? Or could you even look that far ahead?
Funny you say that. I didn't plan on doing a big year last year. That when January 1st, I woke up, there was some already rare birds hanging out, and I was joking to friends, oh yeah, this would be so much is already here. We had pygmy nuthatch, which was the first time they've been on the island since I think 87. There was a summer tanager, which is wildly rare out here, white-breasted nuthatch, and I was saying that this could be a year to do it. And the year just kept getting better through January, and 2 days before January 15th, someone put on a hooded oriole, a gated seniors community about an hour north of Victoria. And I messaged them saying, wow, that's a great bird. I'd love to see that. Is there any way I couldn't get through? I ended up connecting with one of the homeowners because my cousin works for a retirement home in the area. And so had connections with retired people in the community who were like, no, this guy's okay. He can come. And so on the 15th, got a message while I'm in the shower, messaged my friend, said, okay, we can go see the hooded oriole. You got 15 minutes. I'm picking you up. Let's go. And it was standing there with all of them, seeing this thing. It should have been down in Belize and driving back saying, no, this is the year. I've always wanted to do this. This is going to happen. And so from January 15th on, it was, all right, I got to talk to Anne Nightingale. I got to come up with, I built a whole spreadsheet of birds ranked from most common to rarest, when I should expect them, where I should be going. Like I said, with work, I was really fortunate to get to go out to Triangle Island for horned puffin. I was really fortunate to do a lot of surveys in Barkley Sound, which is a just amazing gem of the West Coast for, again, like 10 species of birds at global thresholds. I was able to work with our partners, Raincoast Education Foundation, to volunteer or to represent BC nature at the Tofino Shorebird Festival, talking to people about how significant those mudflats, the Pacific Rim National Park is to migratory shorebirds, where, while there got Hudsonian godwit, snowy plover, and I got to go to all these herring spawns, which for those who aren't aware, every February, March, Pacific herring come in the millions, if not billions, to certain areas. And they have these spawns that are so enormous, they're visible from space. They turn the entire ocean this sort of baby blue turquoise. And obviously that many fish in one place, that many fish spawning, eggs everywhere, you get tens and hundreds of thousands of gulls and ducks coming in on that. It's historically been a great time to pick up things like king eider. We have about 40 records for BC, most of them at herring spawns. Didn't manage to pick one up, but the herring spawn, though luckily one just showed up in November or December in Victoria and spent a couple weeks, which was nice. Historically fantastic time to find things like glaucoskull. Same thing, this is a weird year, one didn't show up, but no, so I got to go to I think every herring spawn on Vancouver Island for work this year, and I couldn't ask for a better opportunity to do something like a big year than getting paid to go work with communities and meet with the best birders in an area to go count birds.
A lot of people who work full-time, they have to balance their travel with their actual full-time job. To have these opportunities like you did is phenomenal. So once you decided you were starting, did you arrange with your work to say, these are some of the places I need for my big year? Can I do my surveys and do things around those locations?
As soon as I decided I was going to do a big year, obviously I reached out to my employer and they were incredibly accommodating. accommodating. As you can imagine, working in a birding organization, there's a lot of sympathy for, oh, you want to go see cool birds? Yeah, we can. That's a tendency we can relate to. I made sure to commit to them. Like, a huge part of the Big Year is making people aware of conservation issues and fundraising for Rocky Point, the organization I volunteer for. So I told them, if this gets in the way of us being able to protect birds, to work with communities, to do these conservation sites justice, I will cut it off. Because if that's happening, it's obviously become counterintuitive. And with regards to working with them to make sure I was going to the right places for the Big Year, if you ask someone, hey, design a job that would work really well for a Big Year, I would say, okay, I need to go to where all the birds are when all the birds are there. So it really just fell into my lap that way. As I mentioned, I coordinate the program for the whole province. And so there were times I had to leave the island. Somehow, amazingly, I didn't end up being off island when anything rare showed up that didn't stay till I got back, which I still can't believe. I was really thinking that was going to shoot me in the knees there. Kind of the closest, we had a work trip up to Malcolm Island to work with one of our nature clubs up that way on a community bird count. It is where I got mountain bluebird really early in the year. But while we were there was a red-naped sapsucker and a green heron that showed up in Victoria, which had I not been working, I would have ripped off and I would have got here in time to see. But obviously, you're working with a community on their community bird counts. Truly some of the nicest birders I've ever met in my life. The point of this wasn't necessarily to get the highest number that is statistically possible. The point is to go birding with the right people, go birding to the right places. I'm not going to jettison a community who wants to do good work because of a green heron.
How did that affect your social life and your family life? Were there instances where they were forgiving you of missing things? Would there have been conflict if they said, we don't want you to go?
Yeah, I think from the get-go, I really set out saying, I want to break this record. I want to do as good of a job as I am able to do. And I think part of that definition, if something is just unfeasible, if it's too much, if going there is going to risk my health seriously, there was a mistake. I could have potentially gotten this citrine wagtail that spent a couple hours in Victoria if I had canceled a survey, said no to a community who I was supposed to be working with, and driven immediately to Victoria and then driven back over Sutton Pass at night.
Which is crazy. I've done it.
And I did do some of those things, but that one was one where I'm like, I was already sick and I'm like, I don't know if I could safely do that 9-hour drive and then start a seabird survey crack of dawn as soon as I get back. I really hope that bird sticks, but I got to do justice to myself. I got to do justice to my family. I got to do justice to the community I'm working with. And it flew away. And it was a bummer, but at the same time, it's one of those ones where it's, look, I am happy with who I am at the end of this Big Year. That's a bummer, but such is life. But with regards to sort of family, community is amazing. Community, I had friends, I had people I'd never met before offer to go out and stake out rarities for hours before I arrived while I drove up from Victoria to make sure I could get on it. I had a guy I've hung out with 2 or 3 times, Pete, go and not only confirm where a common grackle was hanging out, which I know for those of you from the rest of North America, not a good bird, very good bird for Vancouver Island. He not only figured out its pattern for when it was coming to this feeder, he tracked it back to the swamp that it was spending most of its time in when it wasn't at the feeder, then spent 2 extra hours while I drove there, making sure it was there when I got there. So the community aspect was amazing, from people giving me rides to people giving me places to stay to people offering me free boat rides to everything in between. The family side's tough. I got married in 2023. My wife, Sophia Stewart, is the most amazing person I have ever met in my life, and it was difficult. I would really say I had a lot of funny conversations with some I'm sure you type older birders throughout the year who've been like, how was doing it with the old wife? And I told them the same thing every time, which is there's no way I could have done this without her. Like, she, not from making sure our pets stayed healthy to making sure I was sane, is the whole reason I was able to keep doing this. But yeah, no, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't difficult. Anyone thinking of doing a Big Year should really consider what's going to be the impact on their community, what's going to be the impact on their family, and can they make that work? If my job didn't tie into this, if it aligned where I did a 40-hour work week and then had to leave for the weekend on top of that, I don't know if I would have had it in me, at least in this stage. Maybe later on, maybe when I was retired, who knows?
I did Big Years before I was retired, and then I did the Canada Big Year after I was retired, and Sue tried to keep me sane the time I went back to Vancouver after just getting back because of the horn puffin, but she was on board with it. Always asked, did you read my blog? I don't have to read your blog. I'm living your blog, because she knows I'm crazy. She puts up with it to a certain extent, but unless you win a lottery, you're not doing it again. As the year wore on, did your plans get updated as you got certain species and heard about others that were possible to get?
Oh, without a doubt. The whole year was, this showed up in Nanaimo, this showed up in Parksville, this showed up there, you got to take off right away. So it was constant U-turns. In terms of planning where I was going to be when, I sound like a broken record here, because I was already planning on going to the herring spawns and the salmon runs and the migratory routes and when certain birds were hanging out in certain areas. That just ended up lining up really well. There were obviously huge surprises. But like I said, when the Sabine Skull came in, I ran out, my friend and I rented a boat. We bought a little pack of frozen herring, and we went out and we were trying to chuck them out out to get gulls to come down on us. This year, for the only a handful of times ever, Arctic terns bred in the Salish Sea, which, again, they shouldn't really be south of northern Alaska, Nunavut area. My buddy of mine, Steph, went out with who has a boat. We drove up to Nanaimo, and with a couple other friends, we boated out to these tiny islets and, found these Arctic terns. I think as much as it was important to see as many species as possible, it was really important to experience those species. I ended up getting Arctic tern a couple times later in the year. We had a terrific year for them. They were just all over Victoria. But that was the first one, and I'm so glad that my first Arctic tern for the year, rather than being we're on a boat with a whale watching company out of Victoria and going, oh my God, there's one, oh, it's gone.
Yeah.
It was, wow, look at this pair of terns. They're fighting off an eagle. They've cleared out these entire islands, so they're the only thing breeding on it. We were snorkeling in the densest schools of rockfish small I've ever seen in my life. It was like you were in a cloud of fish, and you would see them punching down through it, and you would hear them flying overhead, because anytime another gull, a duck, an eagle came anywhere nearby, these two tiny terns would go and just harass the hell out of it.
So I always like to ask this. The weather in Nanaimo is much better than, say, going up to the east coast of British Columbia and up into the mountains on the highway through hell, which I did numerous times. Did you have some interesting travel adventures? What kind of things did you encounter that made...
Yeah, scary or exciting. Like you mentioned, living on the West Coast, rain is really the big... There's a certain amount of rain you can bird through, and there's a certain amount of rain where there's nothing here. There's not a single bird can be found. But from a Big Year math perspective of trying to see stuff offshore, the storms coming off the Pacific this year have been believable. We had, back in November, a bomb cyclone. I'm not going to pretend I know the ins and outs of what a bomb cyclone is. All I know is living in Victoria, it means a shitload of rain and winds like you would not believe.
I'm going to step in real quickly and explain a bomb cyclone. To the best of my limited knowledge and research, it is a cyclone. All storms are cyclones that evolves rapidly over 24 hours and exponentially in strength and causes the kind of storm that Liam was talking about.
It was towards the end of the year, and I was still missing and still missed late-on and short-tailed albatross, as well as some of the more way out there birds like parakeet auklet and mottled petrel, which are a bit of a hope and help. And we said, you know what? Those winds are, if an albatross is going to come here, that's the wind. And so I talked to some friends who've lived here longer than I have. Is it safe? Like, where can I sea watch from? And they were telling me, look, we're going to be expecting upwards of 2 to 3 meter swell. Our sea watch spots are going to get washed over, and they're going to be throwing logs. Like, the ocean is ferocious. I genuinely think if I'd gone out to Otter Point, which is our best sea watching spot in Greater Victoria, there's a good chance I wouldn't have come back. And so I was looking at alternatives, and I realized we have a ferry called the Blackwell Ferry Line, which runs from Victoria down to Washington. And in it, since the 50s, it has been canceled due to weather twice. It's I think it's an old destroyer or minesweeper. It's this huge ferry. Huge storm was coming in, decided it was not safe to go out to the normal sea watching spot. And so I just booked a way to Washington and back on this absolute destroyer of a ferry. I'll show you some photos. We ended up, and spent a lot of time on boats. I know my way around safety. And Nightingale, who's the previous record holder, and she did that in a storm once and it almost killed her. Be careful. And so I got all my best rain gear. I got my Coast Guard grade life jacket. I brought my satellite beacon so that if I got washed overboard, I could let Coast Guard know where I was. And then I brought a bunch of rope and lashed myself to the bow. And it was the funniest thing. So the way over to Washington, it was dead calm, like calm before the storm. And you could see this absolute washing machine of black clouds on the horizon. And on the way back, I go out there, I'm head to toe Gore-Tex gloves, huge boots, satellite, life vest, tying myself. And this guy comes over and goes, I never feel more at home than on a rough sea. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's cool. And he's wearing a rain jacket and jeans. And I'm like, where are you from? And he goes, oh, interior Oregon. I'm like, oh, do you spend a lot of time on rough seas? And he's, yeah, I'm really comfortable here. And I'm like, that's cool. And so if you come on the ferry, there's a huge breaker on the Washington side that shelters the harbor. And before we're past the breaker, he's going, wow, it's pretty rough out here. Is it going to get much worse than this? And I look at him and I look down at the rope that is tying my belt to the boat, being like, yeah, this is one of the strongest storms, and it's going to get really bad as soon as we get around. We had waves breaking over the bow. We had very few birds. Turns out those winds, while there could have been an albatross there, all we got were a handful of northern fulmars, which, good in and of themselves. But yeah, it did not turn into the birdapalooza I'd hoped it would, but did not go overboard.
And what happened to that gentleman?
He ran back inside well before.
So his idea of rough seas was the occasional swell on calm waters.
I think it might have been based on lakes in interior Oregon. I'm not sure, but it certainly was not a bomb cyclone cyclone in the Strait of Georgia.
Suffer from seasickness. The worst experience was on the East Coast, just off of Cape May. I was inside because I was resting and I missed a Manx shearwater. That was one of the birds I came on that trip to get. So I just went back out, leaned up against a piece of equipment on the back of the boat and just did not move until another Manx shearwater came. And then I went inside and that was it for the rest of the day. You obviously have done enough boating and been in enough rough seas that seems like seasickness is not an issue for you.
I'm just super lucky that way. I didn't do anything to earn this. Funny you bring up seasickness and Manx shearwater. I mentioned we work with this operator out of Port Hardy on the very northern tip of Vancouver Island. On the Triangle Island trip, Anne Nightingale, a woman who set the record in 2015, they'll only run if they have enough people. And it's really only been the last couple of years they've been doing trips to Triangle. So we've been really trying to let people know about it, et cetera, et cetera. And so she very kindly came up and to help make sure the boat ran and I could go get horn puffin and tufted puffin and everything on those islands. Came up and took one of the spots and we were chatting before getting ready to go out. And I said, what are you feeling? And she said, hey, I really want to see a Manx shearwater. I know they're not common, but that's the only expected lifer we could get out this way. And B, really nervous about seasickness because she gets really seasick, which didn't stop her in 2015. She, I think, went out on 8 pelagics, something like that, way more than I did. But she had this amazing setup of seasickness. She had these special glasses with water on the rim, so it looked like the horizon. She had a special bracelet that would, something about an electric current could help you with that. She has a special pelagic poncho that keeps you totally dry, and I think some of the weight is supposed to help with seasickness. Like, she had gamed this out as much as someone could figure out how to not get seasick, and it was a bit of a funny comparison of me and one of the other guys getting pretty drunk the night before, showing up a little hungover. Like, let's go find some birds. So we get out there, and we'd heard from some photographers there might have been some Manx shearwater in the area the last couple of days, but they weren't quite sure. Maybe they could have been a bullers, not 100%. And so we ran into our first couple flocks of a couple hundred sooties, and I'm right on the bow with about 10 of us. Just pick every shearwater, like, where is it? Where is it? I know it's got to be in here, got to be in here. And I find it, and I go, okay, there's a Manx. Anne is about maybe five, a bit shorter than me, to say the least, as is most of the people in the back of the boat. And I'm really conscious of, I've been in this situation before where people have missed a Manx shearwater because someone at the front wasn't getting out of the way. And so I'm trying at the bow of the Zodiac to try and, okay, it's over there. And I'm starting to lay over the bow to try and get myself out of the way until finally Anne looks at me and says, Liam, you've literally obstructed the entire front of the boat by laying. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. And so I finally just got out of there and everyone got to see it. I think we ended up having 2 in that flock. Super accommodating. We spent about 15 minutes with them. Thank God everyone got to see it, or I would have felt like a real jackass after all they'd done for me to go out on that trip.
That is hilarious. On occasion where I've been trying to get my 5'7" head over all the people at the front of the boat. There was one, and it was at the front of the boat, and I was at the front of the boat, and everyone was saying, shearwater, shearwater. The problem I had, and I don't know if this happens on your pelagics, is that they'll say shearwater, but they won't say which one it is. And I was thinking that I knew what was there, but no one said anything. And it wasn't until after the trip I contacted a couple other people, and they said, yeah, that was the bird. No one said the name. They all kept saying shearwater.
Yeah.
Is that something that you've encountered, or is that just the East Coast people?
Oh, totally. So another program that we built this year with Rocky Point, so taking off my BC hat back to Rocky Point, they're the end of 2023 to Eagle Wing Whale Watching Tours, which is a local whale watching outfitter out of Victoria. And we said, hey, you're 1% for the planet. You have every ethical certification we can imagine. We've been out with you. You're amazing. Would you want to expand in the birding ecotourism market a bit? We have a lot of really qualified birders, and we think there'd be opportunity to partner more here. And one of the owners, Brett Sober, just been amazing about it. So this year we developed 2 programs. One of once a week, they give us a free ticket to give to one of our certified volunteers to go out and get counts on some of the islands of the Salish Sea, some of the banks, so marine rises underwater, the great upwellings that birds come in at, and collect data that hasn't ever been collected before, or at least not nearly this thoroughly. And then also we organized a number of commercial trips that we marketed to the birding community, where I would be the lead guide. We would let birders know this. We're not going to stop for anything but the coolest whales. We're really going out to find Palmer and Jaeger and Arctic tern and get into the middle of these Sabine gull flocks. So if you're interested in that, come along. We, over the course of the year, for exactly that reason, knowing that we had everyone on board, from your gull experts who can tell a hybrid glaucous herring gull from a mile to people who'd never ID'd a robin, worked out, here's how we're going to make sure everyone gets to see what they want to see. And it was this really cool iterative process of where we need to stand, how we need to point people when we're going out, telling them how the clock system works, what 11 o'clock means, what 1 o'clock means. And also the thing we said before every tour was, if we go out and you think that you see a red booby and you shout it out and it turns out to be a California gull. That is fine. We're all going to make mistakes, and I would so much rather you make that mistake. If we get back to the harbor and you show me a photo of a red-footed booby, you didn't call it out because you weren't sure, then I'm going to be mad. So we really tried to, I think communication is key for anyone who else is trying to get people on birds. I think a lot of the time, especially newer birders, are really nervous about saying, oh, I'm the one person who hasn't seen the Pomeranian Jaeger, or which one is the Pomeranian Jaeger? They look really similar. And so we'll try and say when we get really rare birds, like we had a tufted puffin, which is really good for Victoria. We had 2 Leach's storm petrel this year, which is crazy.
That's
for
the
Victoria.
bird. It was the Leach's storm petrel that was the one, because they just say storm petrel. I said, is that the Leach's? I'm looking at it. They take it for granted sometimes that everybody else knows what they're talking about.
And that's it. So we try with the really good birds to say at least 3-4 times if we're on it every 30 seconds. Has anyone not seen it? Raise your hand if you haven't seen it, and we're going to help make sure you see it, because there's nothing sadder than getting back at the end of the trip and having someone come up to you and say, I didn't actually see the Pomeranian Jaeger, right? Or I didn't get a look at the ancient merle, and realizing that just by those quick, hey, raise your hand if you still haven't seen it, you could have fixed that. And like I said, Eagle Wing's been amazing in helping us figure that out. We couldn't ask for a better partner in that, and it's been such a great way of raising funds for Rocky Point Bird Observatory. Yeah, I swear there's birds on land. I know I've told them.
Let's get to those. But what were some of the rarest birds and some of the most interesting trips you took to get those rare birds?
Yeah, I'll start with most interesting and then work to rarest. Vancouver Island's a really interesting island in that it's almost connected to the mainland through the Discovery Islands, which is this broken archipelago of islands that kind of gets us up into Mount Waddington. And so because of that, for an size, we don't have a bunch of endemic species. We have some kind of unexpected stuff, a few plants, a trillium. We have a marmot that is critically endangered, that if anyone ever has the chance.
I love the marmots. I had the best time watching them.
Yes. If anyone at the Vancouver Island Foundation, if anyone's to get in touch, they do really good work, and they're who you can see them through if you put in your time. But even though we don't have any endemic bird species, we actually have a surprising number of endemic subspecies. Some of those range from Hutton's vireo. We have an insect subspecies, which looks pretty similar to the mainland one. If you put them side by side, for me, I wouldn't be able to tell you. But then that ranges out to more interesting ones. We have an endemic pygmy owl subspecies. It's a bit small. I think it's smaller and darker. Its signifier has a slightly different song. And then most fascinating to me that I hadn't seen until this big year was the only thing on Vancouver Island, white-tailed ptarmigan, is an endemic subspecies. They're larger than any other white-tailed in the world. They have white in different places. They're differently colored, and they're just amazing. And they're also, because our mountains are relatively quite a bit smaller than mountains on the mainland, a real climate change frontier species. Like we really have seen them as they're getting pushed to the very, very tops of mountains, declining in the last couple decades. And there's some fantastic people working on them. Provincial Park's one of the best spots on the whole island to go and get a look. A lot of them are banded. We have 3 high altitude species that I had to go for the big year. Our gray-crowned rosy finches, which breed in really small numbers up on some of the glaciers around Stratham and the Lake. We have a small population of American three-toed woodpecker. Towards the beginning of the year, I still haven't 100% figured this out. I think it's a stress fracture in my ankle that really made hiking, some of the longer hikes, quite a bit more difficult. So you asked earlier, how did I pivot my plans, especially for the rosy finch? Daniel Donachie, the guy I mentioned earlier, who does Sea Watch with Rocky Point, we had plans to go hike Golden Hind, one of the highest mountains on the island, to make sure we got onto a ledge that we think they breed at. And I was saying, I don't know if this is going to be feasible. And with 8 trips up into the subalpine looking for three-toed woodpecker, I don't want to end an island big year without getting the island endemic subspecies. But man, this is starting to take a toll. And super luckily, my friend Simone, who was plugged in with the Alpine Club of Canada's Vancouver Island chapter, found out they were doing a bio blitz, so going up and using iNaturalist to document every species you can on 5040 Mountain towards Tofino, and that it was a pretty easy 2-ish hour hike up to a cabin, so you didn't need to carry a lot of gear. Again, with work, we actually reached out and said, hey, we heard you doing a bio blitz. We have a lot of experience with this. Can we help? Like, we can bring moth lights, we can bring bat detectors, we can bring a thermal camera. Like, we can really go out and do more than just looking at plants, but really trying to figure out the more niche species. And they said, yeah, we'd love to. And so we partnered with the Alpine Club, and I got to go up with my friend Simone and her fiance Simon. And that was actually partway up where he, being in the Navy and actually knowing about injuries, looked at my ankle and was like, that's not good. You need to, you maybe stop hiking to the Alpine. And I was like, okay, thank you. But we got up there and immediately put our bags down at the cabin, and Rosie Finch flew right in, spotted by Simon. That was already exciting enough. And then went to bed, crack of dawn the next morning, climbed up to the ridge and had the super accommodating pair of terms, calling, hanging out with us, watch them fly off into the mist over one of the smaller ice packs. And I did eventually get the 3-toed as well on, I think, try number 8 or 9 with something like 50 or 60 hours of hiking put into that species. I guess if we've come from the ocean water level, lowest elevation you get now, that was the highest, was 5,040 feet on 5040 peak, looking for ptarmigan.
My favorite hike ever was to get the Kalima Warbler in Texas.
Oh, nice.
I got to the parking lot before it was even light, and just as the dawn was breaking, I started hiking. I was up close to where the birds are by 10 a.m., found a good flock of them by 11, and then at that point, I just turned around and went right back down the way I came, and I just can't do those kind of hikes anymore.
I think I'd be remiss in not bringing this up as we're talking about this. Obviously, I think you and I aren't at the level that we would need this, but in terms of accessibility and birding, it's one of the things I really love about the island is that there's a real effort from the community to make things accessible to people. And the best example that I think is both the best kept secret and the secret that I'm like shaking the birding community being like, please be aware of this, is Strathcona Provincial Park, about 2/3 up the island. They have this groundbreaking program where they've created an entire subalpine boardwalk that is accessible by these trail rider devices they own that you can borrow for free that can facilitate people who are quadriplegic getting into the subalpine. So you don't even need to be able to use your neck muscles, and they will provide volunteers to get people out into Canada J territory and American 3-toed territory and up to these places where there are very few places in the world with someone with that level of physical mobility issues would be able to get. And for those who are similarly facing any sort of similar mobility issues, I highly recommend the group Birdability. They're not based in BC. They're just a really good not-for-profit that is looking to make birding more accessible to people with all sorts of impairments. And they developed a map, it's all community input, and I strongly recommend people view and participate in it, where any member of the community can go out to their favorite birding spot and they fill out a short form that answers things like, how steep is it? What's the ground made of? Is it gravel? Is it cement? How loud is it? How often are there benches? If you're going to walk around this lake, how often can you find a place to sit? And I know from having people in my life who I love who have been diagnosed with this, those are the types of questions that I, as someone who's pretty mobile, don't think about. But that's the difference of if you're chasing a rarity or even just wanting to see a bird, like we're saying with white-tailed, that's what you need to know before you go. It's one of those things where I just wish everyone was more aware of it. And I wish especially those of us who have the privilege of being able to do hikes, whether they're 5 days in the backcountry or 10 minutes down at your local beach, could participate in them and make sure those things become more accessible to others.
As I struggle with mobility issues and birding for people who have disabilities, because I know what it's like. So what were some of the other birds did you chase and succeed at?
Yeah, so didn't get the calliope hummingbird, but that's a very funny segue into one of the rare birds I had this year. Around April or May, I was planning a trip with a couple friends up to a northern section of the island called Naka Creek to go look for northern goshawk, which is doing really poorly on the island because of logging, but really the case of the whole coastal subspecies. And right before I was going up, and the previous record holder messaged me and said, hey, I'm on this hummingbird group, and someone had this is a purposeful mispronunciation on my part here, of hummingbird. And I went, oh, calliope hummingbird, that's cool. I'm driving up there tomorrow. I have a friend coming in from Idaho, so I'm not going to go early and leave him stranded in Victoria. We'll go for it there. And so we drive up, but we get to the ferry terminal to cross to this tiny island just off. I tell him, hey, I'm going to go look for a calliope hummingbird. And him being from Idaho, I might just stay in Comox. Those are our most common hummingbird in Idaho. I'm not super excited about that. And I'm like, up to you, whatever. And he goes, oh, whatever. I came all this way. I'll join you. And so we go out and we talk to this homeowner. She's lovely. She tells us to be careful because her downstairs neighbor trains attack dogs. But she lets us hang out in her garden. And so we stand there. And as we're talking to her, a male Costa's hummingbird in full adult breeding comes and lands in front of us at the feeder of about 5 feet. And she's still talking. And me and Carter are there like, oh my God, that's not a calliope. For reference, calliope breed all through the interior of British Columbia. We get probably one a year-ish on the island. They're rare, but they're whatever. That was maybe only the, I think, 6th or 7th Costas that's ever come to Vancouver Island.
Wow.
And this was a male, and like a full adult male that was singing for us and displaying and feeding. And so it was one of those ones of, wow, I'm so glad I didn't not go for this. I thought it might be a calliope. And we ended up, the homeowner was just amazing. We talked to her for ad nauseum about, okay, if you don't want people to come, that's okay, but this is a really exciting bird, and if you're open to it, we figured out a program based on some of the stuff you guys have done out east.
It's the ambassador program here in Ontario.
So we did a bit of like a nascent ambassador thing where we we just had birders from the local community who we knew were top shelf, ethical, steward people to come and visit. A lot of people got to see the hummingbird and stuck around for like close to a month or so, and it was just amazing. That was a good one. That was, I think, maybe the 40th or so record for BC. The rarest bird by the numbers I had this year, my friend Joachim Bertrand, he did a big day on May 12th at the very dusk. At the end of the day, he sends a message to the group saying, I don't know if I've been out in the sun too long or what's going on, but I have a really weird shorebird here, and it looks a hell of a lot like a temming stint. And so I sprinted down to the car, got out there. It was already dark. There was no way I was going to find the shorebird, but was there, crack it on the next day. And sure enough, we had a temming stint stay for about, must have been close to a week. Tons of people got to see it. It would fly around. It called a couple times, super accommodating, spent a lot of time with it. It was just amazing.
We have situations where there are birds on the other side of the Niagara River in New York State, and you can see them from Ontario. Are there any spots in Vancouver Island like that where if you're on the ferry coming back from Washington, is there a spot at which you can see a bird that you'd be like, oh, but it's on the US side from where I am on the boat? How does that work?
So obviously for county districts, there's a line in the water that's the end of Canada. You can't count past that. I said from the beginning of my big year, I'm really drawn to the concept of an island big year because it's not a political boundary. It's an island. There's no dating what is and is not the island. That being said, the boundary I drew was if Vancouver Island is absolutely clouded in smaller islets, whether those are tiny rocks the size of a basketball to islands of 10 kilometers across that 1,000 people live on. And so I said, I'm going to draw my boundary as if the nearest point of land is Vancouver Island, that's part of the greater Vancouver Island ecosystem. If the nearest point of land is the mainland, off limits, I can't count there. And that applies to the water as well. Because the political boundary, for anyone who's looked at it, it's all jagged, cuts through different channels, does that. Fun fact, we very nearly fought a war with America over that boundary, over someone shooting a pig on San Juan. Look it up, it's a good time. And so we had a couple times where on these whale watching trips I was telling you about with Eagle Wing, we'd be right out at the border, found I think 5 or 6 common terns in US waters before I found one in Canada. And I was saying, like, man, if I miss common tern because they were all in America, I would be pretty annoying. And yes, it didn't come up much. It would have come up more if I finally was able to get some of the pigs I tried to plan out of Port Renfrew to go out to Swiftsure Bank. But thankfully, it didn't really factor in, just because, again, it's an island. Like, you have to work pretty hard to get out to that marine border, and you have to very intentionally decide to go to another, like, smaller islet. Right. If we're going purely by the numbers of what is rarest for just Vancouver Island, one of the rarest birds I saw this year, and you can laugh at me all you want, was a black-capped chickadee. We have no idea why. Black-capped chickadee are just completely unable to cross the Salish Sea onto the island.
They don't know about taking the ferries?
So funny you say that. We have one black-capped chickadee on Vancouver Island that's been here for about 3 years. It comes and goes and disappears. It hangs out with all chestnut. And what is it? So it was refound this summer. I ran out and got it. We think it might have actually taken the ferry across. There's no reason they shouldn't be on the island. But speaking of boundaries, we used to joke before we had a record of black-capped chickadee for the island that we were going to go and borrow the Space Observatory telescope on Observatory Hill here in Victoria and have someone on the Washington side get one of those massive foam fingers and point to one so that we could see it from Victoria. We didn't do that because obviously they're not going to lend us a multi-million-dollar.
My asterisk bird for 2022 is a limpkin, and it was in Fort Erie on the U.S. side of the Niagara River. After everybody left, I was there until the sun went down, just hoping it would take off, fly to the middle of the river, and it could go back, and I would have been happy. And then the next year, 3 of them showed up. The Fort Erie one, there was a big blizzard coming the next day, and the wildlife organizations grabbed it, overwintered it, and then drove it down to the northmost region of the U.S. that they're found and saved the day with that one. Are you involved in conservation in terms of saving injured birds and taking them to rehab?
So I don't do much of the rehab work. I volunteer for Rocky Point Bird Observatory. I'm on the board. I'm also have to use their First Nations liaison. We're a not-for-profit that's similar to Long Point out east, that does bird banding, so we help to monitor different trends in population statuses for any bird that comes near us, really, or that we can catch in our nets. We have owl banding. We're the most active Northern Saltwater banding station in North America, and we partner with all manner of researchers, government, et cetera, on everything from testing whether neonicotinoids are getting into hummingbirds through the pollen on them, to what biotoxins are accumulating in feathers, to the health of various species, to putting out MODIS tags to see where exactly our resident fox sparrows are going and what might be going on. With regards to rehabbing, we work hand in hand with the local rehab station. We get phone calls all the time about, oh, a bird hit my window, oh, this happened here. what can we do when we have birds that are injured at the station? We'll bring them there to be rehabbed. I've driven a couple there myself, but with regards to specific rehabbing, that's not quite our shtick.
So when did you break the record? Was it a significant bird?
It was. Let me make sure I get this date exactly right. I have my spreadsheet here. So I tied the record with an American golden plover that flew over Otter Point, the Sea Watch spot I mentioned, on September 3rd, and then broke the record the next day with a long-tailed Jaeger at Clover Point, which felt very fitting because long-tailed Jaeger is one that we have good years, we have bad years. This was a bit of a mix, and it was right at I think it might have been the last one seen on the island that year. I missed them quite a few times. And it was a very significant bird to me because I mentioned I got married in 2023. At that point, I'd never seen a long-tailed Jaeger. A lot of my groomsmen came to Victoria early from all over North America to come and be at my wedding. And the week before, we rented a small boat out of a local marina and went out, and they gave us a crap one. The motor died. And so we were floating out and slowly floating into a prison as the prison guards were like, get the hell out of the prison. And we're like, nothing we can do. And so finally the marina comes, they hitch us up, they start towing us. And the second they start towing us, I go, holy shit, what's that? And we turn, and a juvenile long-tailed Jaeger has landed right next to the boat. And so we signal the boat that's towing and say, hey, we're not mad about the bad motor, but can you do a circle so we can see this bird? And they look at us, you're floating into a prison. Like, that's your main concern? And we're like, yes. It ended up being a lifer for all of us on board. So that was that wasn't the big year, but having that be the big year was pretty.
It's probably one of the more adventurous ways to get a lifer.
Yeah, being towed behind another boat with a dead engine past a prison.
Besides the calliope, was there another big miss that was more disappointing?
Oh, yeah, for sure. As far as I know, either reported it somewhere public or reported on 327 species reported on Vancouver Island in 2024. Of those 327, so I saw about 87% of all the birds seen, and some of the misses really got me. There was the citrine wagtail, which sucked. It was the BC second wagtail, and people around here talk about it like it was the first one, as if it was like the second coming of God. And that one spent an entire winter. And so when it showed up, and I was like, I don't think it'll be safe. I really think this would screw up this whole work project. I really want to keep working with this community on these community surveys. And it took off after a couple hours. Oh, man, an annoying miss, pine grosbeak. There were two that hung out at an arbutus tree on like early January before I was doing my big year that I totally could have got. And instead I ended up spending half of December hiking all over every high altitude trail I could find, trying to find them up in the higher elevations. And we had a terrible winter the year before. And so it seems like it killed off the arbutus berry crop. And so unlike before, when you really put enough time and you should find one feeding on an arbutus tree, there was just nothing. Snowy owl, there was one that showed up on someone's roof out in Souk. I spent a couple days driving circles around there. I ended up meeting the guy, and he told me if he'd let me know, it would come back. There was a rambling that showed up for all of 5 minutes up in Duncan. So there were some really good birds. Both brown booby and mass booby were sighted about 10-15 kilometers offshore, which one of them I ended up going to spend more time at area offshore to see. Maybe you got a couple thousand kilometers of Pacific and one bird. It's pretty not going to happen.
Was there one bird that was like literally the most expensive bird of the year?
The farthest north you can drive on Vancouver Island, if you go to the farthest logging road, is about 7 hours. See, maybe those first breeding Arctic terns, in that we trailered a boat all the way up to the Nile, spent an entire day on the water, just in marine fuel. And even then we were splitting that all with friends. Speaking of birds I missed that really hurt, just as we were hitting the water and heading out to the single breeding pair on Sisters Islet, we got a report of a red-headed woodpecker, which was a first record for Vancouver Island, down on Galliano Island, one of the islands just off the island. And we're there and we're like, we're not going to not go see this tern colony. That's too cool. We're going to go hang out with these terns. While we were there, war gamed the whole thing of, okay, we're going to meet up with another guy and ladies. We're all going to go down. We're going to ferry over to Salt Spring, and then we'll take the Salt Spring ferry to Galliano. We know a guy there. We'll stay at his house, sleep on the floor, and then be there first thing in the morning to go for the redheaded. And so we do all this. We figure out where we can leave the boat. It's really expensive to take a boat on the ferry. Leave it at his house. We drive down. We catch the last ferry to Salt Spring. Just as we're boarding, I go on my phone, and I go, holy shit, guys, get out of the car. And we had mistimed it, and there was not a Salt Spring Galliano ferry. And it was the last ferry of the day. And so we get out and we wave our arms. We're like, oh, BC Ferries, we're really sorry. Can you please stop letting people on? Can we get off this ferry? And they're like, no, you already paid. Go. And we're like, please, you're going to get us stuck on Salt Spring all night for a bird we can't even go for. And they're like, fine, get out of here. So that was a somewhat expensive mistake. But we did end up waking up the next morning at, I think, 5 or 6 a.m. to catch the first ferry to Galliano from Victoria. And the bird never made a reappearance.
So that was the most expensive bird you didn't get.
Yes, combined with the most expensive bird I did.
So at the end of the year, you broke the record, and now, ta-da-da, what was the final total?
As of a green-tailed towhee on December 31st, the new record for Vancouver Island is 286 species. So 17 birds ahead of the previous record. And I can't believe I'm saying it so soon. I can't wait for someone to take another crack at it. It was, again, I feel like a broken record, but it was such an amazing time just to meet so many birders from Port Hardy to Victoria to Nanaimo to Fino, and just receive so much support from the community, including the person who held the record. She and I went birding on the 31st after the Towie to go take one final stab at a glaucous gull, or try and find a new glaucous gull at the dump, and it didn't pan out. But we were saying was that we really hope someone else takes a crack at this, because it's so much fun. It's such a great way to learn the island. It's such a great way to let people know what's going on, the organizations all, and it's so much fun to help them. I can't wait to help the next person that gives this a try. And I don't know, people have speculated on whether it's even possible. I'm really curious if someone can ever hit 300 for Vancouver Island. I think this year, if I wasn't working and had a hell of a lot more money, maybe. Part of the fun of birding is figuring out the number side of stuff. I was looking at the numbers today, comparing Anne's big year to mine, and the biggest thing that's changed, I think, is there's so many more birders 10 years later.
There's so much more social media.
Exactly. One of her misses for the year was Western Kingbird, because I think there were 2 or 3 seen that year, but none of them got reported until a couple days later. One of them was like 5 minutes from her house, and just there wasn't the systems, not enough people were using eBird that she got a notification. By comparison, there were birds that I saw that they flew off a minute after I got there, that if that person hadn't immediately texted me, there's no way. I was digging into the numbers, and so this year there were 327 countable birds seen on Vancouver Island and surrounding Vancouver Island waters, and I saw 87.5% of them. On Anne's year, there were only 289 countable birds reported on eBird. Again, there could be more out there, and she saw 269, so 93% of them. So she actually saw 5% more of the total birds that year on the island than I did. If hypothetically, like all things consistent, took her level of effort, took her luck, her strategy, her everything, and applied it to this, 93% of birds this year would have put you at, I think, 306 species. So there was a lot of birds this year. There was BC's first ever Mississippi kite passed over Rocky Point Bird Observatory while I wasn't there.
Your spot.
One of the days I wasn't volunteering at the station. There's no way of chasing that down. The snowy owl was seen for 5 minutes, never again. No way of chasing that down. So I'm really proud of my number. I don't bring up those percentages to be like, oh, you've only, I think Anne should be incredibly proud of the gauntlet she threw down in the first place and the effort she put in. I put it out there to say, if you're thinking about it, if you have a job, if you have a lifestyle that allows for it, go for it. Go for it and email me when you do, and I'll drive you places. I'll give you all my tips.
In a lot of cases, people who do big years, especially young people, they learn a lot about themselves and their lives change in different ways. Because you have already been doing it for a career, were there still things that you learned about yourself in terms of perseverance and setting goals?
Oh, without a doubt. It's funny. I feel like the 2 things I learned most for myself from were the long stakeouts. I spent close to 15 hours including the other one, 24-ish hours staking out a blue jay. And you sit there in the rain for that long. At some point, you start thinking about what you're doing, why you're doing it, what's important
Hell
to you.
am I doing here? Yeah, I had a lot of those moments.
Again, shout out to amazing homeowners. Guy didn't know me at all. Let me sit in his yard for that guy 15 hours. Brought me coffee the whole time. Met his whole family. Hung out with his kids. Kept saying, "Hey man, if you want me to get out of here, I really don't want to be a thorn in your side." You really spend a lot of time thinking. The other one is just the driving. I think the final number was about 75,000 kilometers on my car this year. That's a lot of time on the road. It's a lot of time listening to podcasts, listening to books or audiobooks.
90% of my driving was audiobooks and the occasional podcast.
And funnily enough, all that time in the car gave me a chance that year to really dig into my love for history and listen to a bunch of history books and podcasts. But I think really at the end of it, just being able to look back on the year. And like I said, yeah, I missed some birds. I didn't do the stream wagtail, and I'm happy I didn't. I don't think it would have been safe. I don't think it would have been equitable. I don't think it would have been fair to the community I was working with. But I can look back on the year with that sense of pride and knowing that I did everything I could do and still be who I want to be at the end of that year. Proving myself able to do that is huge. It makes it feel like all these other huge projects I want to take on in life are doable. Owning a home, having a kid, writing a book, whatever it might be, you prove to yourself you can do one really hard thing that people are looking and saying, I don't know, that seems crazy. How can you pull that off? And say, no, it's doable. We can make it happen.
Did you have a sort of a mindset to accept certain failures, or did some of them eat away at you?
Every time I missed a bird, I just kept reminding myself that if you got every bird, it wouldn't be fun. With exceptions, some just hurt. But overall, every bird you miss makes every bird you get feel that much more special. And I liked what you're saying about using the big year as a lens and understanding the area around you, the community around you, what's going on, how I approach birding and why I love it so much. I think the reason that these are so fun, and speaking to what you said about what you learned from big about yourself, it was Alison Watt who wrote the book The Last Island about her experience doing field work on Triangle Island at the north end of the island. Said, I had spent most of my life living on the rim of the Pacific, yet looking out over its reaches, I realized that what I knew was what I might know of the sky through a chimney hole. Like I think birding is this lens onto the world where if you want to bake a pie, first invent the universe. If you want to find a glaucous gull, first understand how the season has been in Siberia, what the fish stocks are doing in its native range, what the Pacific storms are doing, when they're hitting, what direction they're coming from, where they're pulling air from and going to, what the herring spawn is doing this year and where it might be strong and where it might be weak and what species it's going to associate it with, how those species are in turn responding to forest fires in the interior and heat waves from the Pacific and the heat blob in the North Pacific and bomb cyclones. And then beyond that, figure out who are the personalities in these areas. Who do I need to make sure I'm on good terms with so that when they find a glaucous gull, they'll tell me. I think love birds, but I love birders even more. And I love learning about the world through birds, such that if you want to figure out what's going on with western sandpiper, you have to understand what's going on with biofilm on the Fraser River estuary and why they're stopping there and the hundreds of thousands on their way. I think it's just a great lens to understand the world and to figure out these things that until you have that foot in the door seem completely incomprehensible. 4 years ago, you told me what's going on with wind and how it's affecting the tides and how that in turn is being changed by macro events going on the Pacific Ocean and how that could result in an Arctic turn fallout in Victoria. I would have told you, no way, can't do, not possible. And now it's no way, I still don't know how to do that. But I can start to piece, I can listen to the people who have figured that out, and it's not Latin to me, and I can maybe start to make a few inferences about here's maybe why ancient merlins are showing up in the tens of thousands. But at the same time, we are the only place now in North America where you can tick Eurasian skylark.
I assume it's still at the airport.
There's maybe 2 to 3 left. Part of the reason I thought this is a good year to do a big year, because I figure you wait another year, all it takes is one particularly inventive kestrel, and we're not going to have skylarks in North America anymore. For those listening, Eurasian skylark, in the early days of British colonialism, a lot of settlers complained that these North American birds don't sound good enough. And I don't know what the heck they were thinking when they said that, but they brought over a bunch of birds, especially to places like Victoria, which at the time was the capital of British Columbia. They released finches, a couple different sparrow species, skylarks, and skylarks were the only one that took hold. And we don't really understand quite why. For a while, they blew up. I think at their highest, they were low thousands. They spread to San Juan. They spread to a couple of the Gulf Islands. You could see them everywhere from Victoria to Saanich to they were starting to get into Nanaimo. And then we think just because the original population was so small, they hit a genetic bottleneck. Like they became too inbred and the population just collapsed to the point where now we're down to 2 or 3 left. I heard them singing in I think February and spotted one kind of displaying over the airport. So if you're one of those types who really wants that for your North America list, your Canada list, I would head there quickly because we're not going to have skylarks much longer. A friend of mine found one on Hawaii this year. They showed up, I think last year someone found one in Tofino. Once we know that the ones that were introduced 100 years ago are fully gone, any skylark that shows up is going to be fair game and not brought there by people a long time ago. Counting birds is fun, but counting birds is only part of the game. People do big years for different reasons. For me, it was about making sure people learned about the island. So thank you for listening to today's podcast. I hope you found something interesting about Vancouver Island, about some of the conservation projects we're working on. As I mentioned, I volunteer for Rocky Point Bird Observatory on the board. One of my goals for the big year was to raise $10,000 to support the organization. If you feel so inclined, I don't volunteer just for anyone. It's an amazing organization full of some of the most passionate volunteers I've ever met. We have literally hundreds of volunteers who put in tens of thousands of hours a year to monitor birds, to check on their health, to understand how their populations are changing, and then educate the public on how we can change that. If you go to rp.org and to donate, you can make a donation and have it go towards that 10,000 goal. None of that money goes to me. I'm covering all my gas, all my hotels, all my schmuck. This is just purely to RPBO expenses.
I will put a link to that in all my social media posts when it airs.
Thank you very much. And we also did a calendar for the big year, just with some of the cooler birds that showed up with fun facts, such as one of the first black-footed albatross we saw for the year, we realized was banded and was 37 years old from Hawaii. So that one's in there, as well as the history of, we're not the only ones banding birds. Here's why banding is important. Here's how we know what we know.
Yes, so some of those albatrosses are older than...
I think Wisdom, was Wisdom a lace-on albatross, I think?
Yeah.
Just another quick interruption. Sorry about that. But really, this is the last one as the podcast is almost over. But Wisdom, the albatross, is at least 74 years old as of this recording in 2025, and is probably a lot older than that, but no one knows. I'd suggest you Google-ate it and learn more about Wisdom. It's a great story.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been nice.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
I'm back, and thanks so much to Liam for taking time out of his busy schedule at the Rocky Point Bird Observatory and all the good work he does with all the communities in Western British Columbia. I hope this episode was as much an education for you as it was for me, because I learned, so much that I didn't even know I wanted to know. I hope you enjoyed it, because I did. And come to the end of season 3 of the Big Year podcast. I can't believe that. Next month, on our season finale, my guest will be my friend and fellow Brant County birder, Ellen Horak. Ellen and her husband Jerry are on a 3-year Big Year quest. They started with a Brant County Big Year in 2023, an Ontario Big Year in 2024, and are in the midst of a Canada Big Year in 2025. Ellen's goal was to see 200 species in Brant, 300 in Ontario, and 400 in Canada in 3 consecutive years. Earlier in the year, Ellen joined me at my kitchen table, with a lovely dessert, by the way, to tell the tale of her first 2 Big Years. I'll have her back in 2026 to recount her Canada Big Year, but that's another season. Until then, happy birding, happy Halloween, and may the ravens and crows stay away from your eyeballs.